Okay, everybody, good afternoon. How's everybody doing? All right, fair, it's got a thumbs up. So this is our last lecture for 2020 for History 116. It's been a very crazy semester, and I applaud all of you for the hard work and the patience and the flexibility that you've shown. So what I'd like to do actually now is explain something. So usually we do course evals during the last class or thereabouts. This year, the course evals we usually do, the official ones are not happening, but I do want to get feedback on the course. And so I have set up an informal course evaluation that I would like to ask you all to do. So it's informal, it's anonymous, but I do receive, I can go on after the survey is done and see who has taken the survey, and it'll put in like a grade for you of 100% if you take the survey. So this will add 1 point to your final grade. It's on the syllabus as such. So I'm going to ask you in a second to do that. I guess a few words survey. It's pretty short. It be constructive, provide some usable feedback that I can use to make the course better in the future. Be kind. If you hated the class, you can definitely say that, but make it in a way that I can take that and use it to improve the class. So if you would actually go now onto Moodle on your computer or your cell phone, you'll see there's a link to a focus forward survey, like in the first part of the Moodle page. So if you click on that, you can get the survey started. I'm gonna sort of step back. I can't see what you're doing, obviously, but when you're done with the survey, you could just give me like a thumbs up, and I'll watch the screen, or you can give me you can type that you're done in the chat. That's fine as well. When everyone seems to be done or about done, then I will start the last class. It's 7:04, so I think around 7:20 we should hopefully be done with the survey. So before you start, any questions about the survey? In the chat, Eamon asks, it is the same survey as, yeah, it's the same one. That's right. Eamon. Any questions? Okay, so if you could just take a second, go find the survey and fill it out. Yes, Maihua, it is the focus survey. Okay, everybody, so we're going to go ahead and start class again. Thank you for taking some time to do that. I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing what your feedback is. This has been an interesting semester in all kinds of ways, and so figuring out what things were successful, what things were not successful will be helpful as we are going to probably be doing this remote teaching for another semester, and then getting our bearings again in that area. So I'm going to do a screen share. Hopefully I'll be able also to share with you at the end of today's class a very short video. So fingers crossed that I get that right. Let me do all of this, okay. Okay. Before I forget, next semester I'm teaching history of Japan before 1800, all the way up to the Meiji Restoration. This is a smaller class, and it's a little bit more advanced. So if you're interested, there are plenty of spots. It is at 8:30 in the morning on Tuesday, Thursday, so it is early in the morning, but that can also lead to all kinds of good things as well. So if you're interested, or if this class this semester was of interest, we'll do things that are a bit more interactive in the class in the spring. So check it out, and if you have questions, you can always email me. I'm happy to give you more information about the class. So I guess sort of the big story that we ended with last class was it was kind of how bad things were for Japan in the 2010s. Thinking about there was a bit of there was some respite until the great Northeast Japan earthquake, and so we're going to talk about the end sort of Japan today a little bit. I'm going to try and see if we can complicate the idea that Japan is just in decline. Some of the indicators of decline for Japan that have been building up over time and that are still very present are the question of the birth rate, which you can kind of see here on this graph that's kind of off the screen. But if you look at the birth rate, this is at the bottom here. This is the amount of people in Japan who are under a certain age, who are young. And then we have sort of middle class, middle age and below is the bigger hump. And then 65 and older is the biggest, lightest shaded area. As we can see here, there's a very sharp decline for everybody in terms of people who are not being born or people who are going to be dying. So this is a big problem for Japan. The birth rate in Japan in 2018 was 1.42 children per woman. And this is bigger than in 2005, but it is in fact, it appears that in 2019 there was actually a decrease from 1.42. And so we're looking at probably the lowest birth rate in Japan since the recording of birth rates began in 1899 in Japan right now. The ratio, again, as I mentioned a few classes ago, of youth to the elderly is quite high, and we're talking about 1/3 of Japan's population being over the age of 60. This leads to an issue of long-term care and of insurance. Who will take care of these people when they are elderly? This is a burden that people are finding themselves having to face in their own homes, but also nursing homes are beyond capacity and trying to find solutions as well. And in this context, and part of the problem, I suppose as well, is a large population of youth who find themselves disaffected, unimpressed with what Japan has to offer, disengaged. And one of the sort of poster children of this phenomenon is the hikikomori. Hikikomori is like is a relatively recent term, but it describes an adolescent or a young adult who is very much withdrawn, who stays at home and oftentimes devotes all their attention to internet, video games, TV, and stays in the room a lot. This might not sound like it's very dramatic. Maybe you yourself, I mean, also in the COVID scenario, this might describe you perhaps right now, but it does go beyond the typical image of a teenager who is lonely and hanging out in their room playing video games. This is actually a picture here of a room of a hikikomori, which you can get an idea, I think, very clearly here of the kind of hoarding and sanitary issues and just a lack of social contact that typifies these usually young men, especially in urban areas in Japan. And this phenomenon has gotten more attention in the past decade or so, but it's gotten much more prevalent over the past 5 or 6 years, I would say, in Japan. And there are lots of exposés on TV about this. It's a well-known phenomenon. And you can imagine that this kind of life does not lead to a higher birth rate either. But I want to sort of push back on this a little bit. I want to sort of think about the fact that while this is a reality that is highly sensationalized and very much in the media, there is a sort of undercurrent as well, a smaller group, but also very, sort of active group of youth that are cosmopolitan, that are looking out at the world, who are very actively engaged with the world, both in Japan, but also beyond Japan. And we see them involved in activism and sort of the protests that were so prevalent in the 60s. They kind of went away for about 20 years, but they've come back, I would say. And we see youth protesting and marching and organizing sit-ins and doing things like that as well, being very involved in politics, perhaps for the first time in their lives. And this has been the case the past 5 or 6 years in Japan in particular. Here we can see an anti-war rally in Shinjuku, and these are all over the place in Japan. And so these are not, I would say, youth who are disaffected and disengaged. They are, in fact, at least in some places at some points and sometimes very much active. And of course, we have to also acknowledge that the Japan's connectivity has just skyrocketed, and that is even more the case every year. There are more trains running, there's more infrastructure, partially because the LDP has made that their policy to keep building and building and building. But this is actually the thing that brings Japan closer together, in the long term, and keeps doing so. And up until the COVID disaster came upon Japan and the rest of the world, unemployment in Japan was at 3.5%, which is very low. So these are some positive things that sort of counteract the image of Japan as only visible, sort of only describing Japan as a country in decline. The Prime Minister of Japan up until this year was Abe Shinzo. He was the longest serving Prime Minister, just a thoroughly LDP politician. And he sort of epitomized a lot of the conservative trends that were prevalent under Nakasone, long before him, and other prime ministers as well of the LDP. But he is also, I think, a very modern and forward-looking prime minister. And under his 8 years in the prime ministership, the premiership, he, I think, did a good job of balancing his goals for Japan in the realm of sort of nationalism and conservative ideology with economic policy that was going to try and boost Japan, and thinking about sort of Japan's international image, improving it and making it stronger as well. So on the one hand, we have, he's very interested in how Japanese textbooks and Japanese papers and books are going to describe Japan's history, and he is interested in making sure that the least offensive words are used to describe Japan's imperialism. He argues that the Western world as a whole has been imperialist for at least 2 centuries. Why should Japan be singled out for this and their atrocities and these kinds of things, and in particular, and so he is pushing always for, and there are several court cases that he has sort of been involved with, or his government has been involved with that are trying to always soften language about imperialism. He does not, admit to the full scale of Japan's atrocities during World War II on the continent and in Southeast Asia. And he wants to make sure that the image of Japan is one that is mostly positive and that shows Japan as a bright shining star in East Asia. He's perhaps most importantly in favor of the country of Japan revising Article 9 to allow Japan's self-defense forces to become an actual military, so Japan can have land, sea, and air forces and use them if necessary. This is an economic choice. It is also a choice of national interest and protection. Also a choice of trying to separate themselves a bit from the United States, which they have been forced to live under the umbrella of since the occupation, trying to sort of claim some autonomy and some distance from the United States. And he has not succeeded yet in changing Article 9. And he has now stepped down as prime minister, so he has been replaced by someone I'll mention in a second. But this continues to be a main priority for the LDP. Another thing I want to mention that I think points to his very mixed approach to policy is his policy strategy of Abenomics, which he talks about the three arrows of expanding the amount of money in Japan that was available. This does lead towards inflation, but that's a planned trajectory that he implemented. He also is interested in stimulus, right? And so putting more money into things that are going to then make more money. The government can spend money in that particular area, and doing less, however, spending on the sort of welfare sector and the social benefit sector of the economy. It's also interested in investment in the private sector and giving support for companies and industries that are going to do well and that are doing well, and also giving over things that are government owned to private companies when that's possible. He didn't find a lot of those chances, but he developed several propositions that I think over the next decade will continue to transition. We already have railroads that are privatized. We already have post offices privatized, and we'll have others I think that will be as well privatized over the next decade if the LDP stays in power. But we can also talk about Abe Shinzo as an advocate of the Abenomics of women, or the womenomics, in which he hoped that he would be able to strengthen the corporate structures in Japan and the economy by pulling more women towards the workforce, by giving women higher roles in government, in companies, so that they could then contribute and be part of society in that way. And he even went as far as opening new daycare centers to try and allow women to work full time. So this was, I think, quite an impressive policy shift for a relatively conservative party. I think that looking back, it has not worked. Unfortunately, Japan has actually gone down in the rankings of gender equality in the workforce, but it does show, I think, an effort that I think eventually will pay dividends over time. And this is also building on this sort of decades of work that women have themselves been doing behind the scenes, and also in the public eye, by revising the Equal Employment Opportunity Law in '97, and then by adding concrete, sort of adding more teeth and concrete stipulations and penalties to that law. And then we see that women are able to get divorced and to work after marriage, or work after marriage full time. And I think today in Japan, about 3.5% of top management executives are women, which is still very small. But before, it was not even at 1%. So we do see these things changing in the 2000s, and the trend, I think, is one that is positive overall. The Prime Minister today, who replaced Abe Shinzo, is Suga Yoshihide, who we see here. He was a top official in the cabinet of Abe Shinzo, so he's very much an Abe loyalist. So the policies of Abe Shinzo are going to be carried on, through his efforts. One thing that's interesting that has come up very recently is his decision, his promise to close down inefficient coal factories in Japan. Japan remains heavily coal powered, in addition to dams and obviously nuclear energy. But there also are plans to open new, more efficient fuel producing coal plants over the next years as well, that he has not asked to stop. So we're not quite sure where that's going to go, but it is definitely on the agenda to discuss that and try and, in general, make Japan's climate change sort of approach and policy more productive, more effective. But besides that, he is definitely going to be sort of in the shadow of and following a lot of the priorities of Abe Shinzo. I think that for sake of time, I'm not going to go on too much detail, but I kind of just wanted to mention some of the things that have over the sort of past 40 years, I guess now for 50 years, been developing that make Japan a place that people do enjoy living in, a country that's proud of its heritage and its history. And even when they're able to sometimes to put us to sort of not focus on the negative, there are lots of positive things as well. And one of the things that happens is there is this effort to transform rural Japan, which is increasingly depopulated, right, into a tourist destination for the city dwellers of Japan. And so we have a tourist industry that is just blossoming and that has continued to be very effective at sort of selling countryside. And the campaign in the 70s of Discover Japan was effective at sort of launching this campaign. In the 80s, there was Exotic Japan. And then the next campaign is called the Furusato, or the sort of the little, the sort of old hometown kind of campaign as well in the 2000s that keeps bringing tourists from Japan all over to rural Japan. And I just want to show you some pictures of some of my favorite places in the old traditional countryside of Japan. So this is Hida village. It is a preserved village, it's a village of houses that date from the 17th and 18th centuries, farmhouses that have several layers. And as you can see here, for example, they have several levels, and each level has a different function. They would, for example, they would be developing silkworm silk in the top floors, and then storing food in the bottom floors. And it was a very sort of efficient and I think very beautiful way of living that you can go and look at and visit today in Hida. The globe as a whole, I think, has taken note of these kinds of places because Japan's been sort of successful at selling these beautiful things and their history and their traditions to the world. UNESCO has recognized many of the sites in Japan as World Heritage Sites, one of which is actually not very far from Hida village. This is Shirakawa-go, which looks like this during the day. The same kinds of houses, but people actually live there, and they work, and there are working farms, and this is a very it is not at all a dead or abandoned village. And it looks like this in the winter. It's very beautiful. I've been there myself, and I can tell you that it does look just like this in real life. And as you can see here, people with their umbrellas, the tourists are flocking to see this still today. I also wanted to touch briefly on Japan's cultural exports. Right? Part of what has made Japan so interesting is for the world is that people have been able to learn about Japan. Sometimes things are sort of packaged in ways that are more popular or more sensational, more impressive, more whatever it might be, but this really has been also very successful. And I just list some things here that you probably know a little bit about. And if we think about the Karate Kid back when I was young, this was a big deal. And I remember being excited about this before I knew anything about Japan. And if we think about the whole world of Steven Seagal movies and Jean-Claude Van Damme and other people in the 80s who popularized Japanese martial arts culture. And this was one of the ways in which people became interested in Japan who before had not thought about Japan at all. And of course, sushi had become popular from the 60s, showing up in LA to its sort of global appeal that it has today and just omnipresence. But we also are able, and thanks to 2013 new UNESCO regulation to only call certain kinds of sushi and Japanese food to call it washoku. It's a label that means it actually has been developed and curated with ingredients and techniques that are indeed intimate to Japan. Baseball, another thing that that has sort of an interesting story that began, in fact, with the United States servicemen in the Navy who were in Japan playing baseball, and this eventually becomes a popular pastime. As you'll recall, it loses its name baseball, and it's termed yakyu, and to remove the Western influence during the Japan's traumatic wartime period. But then it becomes baseball again, and we have figures who gained international fame back in the 1960s. This is Sadahara Oh, whose crane stance you see here was very famous throughout the world. And this tradition of baseball players has yielded lots of famous players in the United States who actually come right from Japan to the US, like Nomo, who played for the Red Sox at one point, like Daisuke, who some of you may or may not have seen play in at Fenway Park. So these kinds of figures are very much part of now our national history in the United States of baseball, and despite their ties to, of course, Ichido as well. And today there are several others who are still playing or who have played recently in very famous teams as well. And of course, anime, which I know that many of you are very interested in. These are just some of the different anime that are so popular today and that have, again, continued to bring Japanese cultural exports and just to inundate, I would say, American market with these products and these publications and these films. Of course, manga. This is One Piece and Sandang, some of the sort of very popular manga that also are now translated and have gone through the same processes that we talked about a few classes ago for how manga became American viewer friendly. One thing I want to talk lastly about is religion. I think I'll just do this very briefly. We have this idea that the government in Japan was very worried about things like greed and Japan's punishment having come in the form of the great disaster, tsunami disaster in March 7th, 2011. But what I want to point out is that a lot of things also point to a country that was very much not selfish, right? And that in religion as a whole was turned very much to try and help the country rebuild after these disasters. Churches and temples and shrines became refuge centers. People organized through these different religious organizations to go and rebuild and take care of people, those kinds of things. It was really quite impressive. And I want to lastly mention one thing that I think it sort of points to the resilience of the Japanese people, but also of Japan's religious traditions. And I think I will let us sort of watch this and then I will end class with that. So hopefully this will work with the sound. Fingers crossed.
On Genius, this man is going to be rocketing his religion into the heart of youth culture. Chanting, holding beads, tapping a giant cigarette into a proportional ashtray. Punk Kansho Tagai is more versatile than that. He's actually well into hip-hop. Get ready to throw your arms in the air like you just don't care. Carry on like that for hours.
Buddhist chants are often incomprehensible to people, so I decided to rap the words, because hip-hop makes you feel good even if you can't understand it.
Smizzle. Message, don't ever go to Detroit though, you'll get shot. Buddhism's appeal don't end there though. In a slightly more dubious move, he's also brought in a tap dancer. To moonwalk, but it's just hard to demonstrate if you have to wear a habit all the time.
So I think on that note, I will go ahead and yeah, it looks like not everyone was able to get the video. I'm sorry about that. I don't know. It's technology that is probably beyond my abilities. But I think I will send you a link so you can watch the video at home if you'd like. I'm going to go ahead, though, I think for the sake of keeping on time. To thank you all for a great semester, and thank you for being here and being available, and for asking great questions, and for working hard on your essays and your exams so far, and just being present. So thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you on other classes and other and other scenarios. Keep in touch, and I hope that you have a great end of the semester, and that you will have a great sort of break from class when they're all over with, and that we'll see each other in person very soon.
Thank you, Professor.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.